I think one of the big things that frustrates me is that people get really, Zerg vs Zerg so random. You know, no one even knows why someone wins, and it's like, no, it isn't random. It's just fast paced, and people like to make excuses. And remember, it's all about focusing on the slight details. Being aggressive is great in Zerg vs Zerg because it gives you tempo. It frees up the pressure from you, so you can macro more effectively, and it puts pressure on your opponents so they make more mistakes. That's what it all boils down to. That's what we're practicing right now. And I'm going to tell you, 90% of players right through to GM level who suck at Ling Bane or have issues with it, it all comes down to them not organizing their Ling Bane before the battle start. And once the battle starts, you do not have time to all kill that shit separately, and you're like manually friggin' clicking on everything, and it's too fast paced. You're going to make misclicks, you're going to screw things up. That's when it comes down to chance. So step 1 is going to be morph Banes. Number 2 is control plus shift to deselect the morphing Banes. Number 3 is control plus 1 to reaffirm. So I'm going to say reaffirm, or like re-hotkey your Zerglings. I'll just say re-hotkey your selection of Zerglings. So selection, of course, meaning what's left over after we've deselected the Banelings. Then it'll be control click for step 4. So when we talk about standard battle column formation, that's where we talk about it takes 3 Banes to kill an enemy Baneling, a morphing Bane, or 2 to kill a Bane. So spread out Banes are always cost efficient. Only the queens and spines make them cost inefficient. The Banelings, the defensive Banes, force them to split. Okay, so you're watching my Zerglings. So I want you to imagine that my opponent's base is directly to the right of my Zerglings, beyond this hedge. Okay? So you see that hedge where my Overlord's moving?
Yeah.
Alright, so that's my opponent's base in that direction. So you always want to think about where your opponent is oriented towards your troops, and you want to imagine a battle column facing that. So a column, obviously we're thinking of like a long winding column of troops leading along like a road, like an ancient army or something like that. The idea behind having a column rather than a big row or just a big spread is that a column will maintain formation. And what we're going to see is as they move towards my opponent's base, they're going to maintain that formation. Because what your units will do, right, is they're always going to take the easiest possible route to the enemy. So if they're in a column, it's always straight ahead. You see, they maintain formation, they maintain spread.
Stay in the same formation, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So a lot of people, when they try to spread out their Banelings, they don't take this into account. I mean, it seems obvious when I explain it like this, but you don't always think about it in such a fast-paced game as StarCraft. So you see, a lot of people will spread them like this, think that's fantastic, but we notice very, very quickly they start to clump up here. Obviously, those 2 at the top caught the edge of creep, so they went ahead a little bit, but and then it becomes prime Baneling target. So obviously, the fact that it takes 2 Banelings to kill an enemy Baneling means that if you're spread out in ones, like so, there's no way Banelings can stop that cost efficiently. They need to use either individual Zerglings or more often queens and spines. And that's really how you defend in Ling Bane versus Ling Bane, right? Your Banelings aren't really there to kill their Banelings because they're not going to be dumb enough to clump up usually. They're there to force your opponent to spread out and filter in a little bit at a time. And as you force that to happen, that's when your queens, your spine, all that sort of stuff has time to become cost efficient. Whereas if you're super clumped up, and they don't have Banelings, you can just run in, ravage everything, right? The queens and spines aren't going to have time to kill everything, but suddenly they have 2 Banelings, and you lose all your Banelings at once.
Right.
So, so that's always something to keep in mind. Something else is, well, why organize it? Look how finicky that was when I was organizing that in a column. Why not instead morph them in a column already? So yeah, so you can see, and it already kind of spread out. So whenever you morph Banelings, just try to make sure you morph them as you run along in that sort of column spread, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be as neat and organized as I did it in the first one, as long as it's generally following that sort of structure. So just adding a few more notes there in our document. So just clicking the banelings into the mineral line, focusing on microing lings. Only look at banelings as they reach the mineral line. You want to really think in terms of, this puts so much pressure on my opponent. So what you'll find is when you're defending, if it drags on in time, remember what I was talking about before? Someone can be all-inning you for a long time, right? And you can feel like, well, because I'm not losing drones, I should be ahead. But what's happening is your opponent can sometimes be macroing perfectly behind it because there's no pressure on them. Even though you think, well, they must be staring at this and like over-microing it. A lot of the time, what people will do, and what I often advise, is don't actually look at your units that much when you're engaging in Zerg vs Zerg. And this is kind of crazy to people because it's the most micro-intensive, matchup, and the most micro-intensive combat is Lingbane versus Lingbane. I don't mean don't stare at it at all, but I mean if you're in a position where you're attacking into a natural, don't over-focus on it. I mean, obviously there's things like divvying up your attention, always do a macro cycle before you go in for an engage. But on top of that, it's just this idea of imagine where your opponent's mineral line is, and I want you to just kind of, let's imagine this gold base is their mineral line, right next to where you are. So what you'd normally want to do is you just want to click your banelings into the mineral line, and because they're pre-spread, they're going to maintain formation, you don't even need to think about them. All you need to do is micro your Zerglings. And only as you reach the mineral line and reach the drones do you actually actively start microing the banelings again. And often, all you'll do is trade for their they'll use their banelings to blow up your banelings, and they might be quite cost inefficient because they're panicking, because they have very little space to work with. You've got to understand the amount of pressure this exerts upon your opponent. And then behind it, you're quite calmly macroing. You're very smoothly swapping into these cycles. So what have you done? Well, people will say they built drones earlier than you, though. Therefore, they're in a better spot. They've been mining longer. In Zerg vs Zerg, more than any other matchup, it's not nearly as important because mistakes, having to pull queens to defend and missing injects, that stuff is normally a lot bigger. Likewise, it's almost impossible to take cost-efficient engagements with Lingbane versus Lingbane defensively. So what I mean by that is if you don't have queens and spines, you will never win a defensive Lingbane fight because they're getting into your drone line, which forces you to engage them. The thing is, it's like what I said here, right? You're not actually trying to kill anything with your Banes and Lings. You're just kind of sending the Banelings into the drone line, controlling the Zerglings, and it forces them to engage on you before you get to the drones. And usually that means they don't have enough space to work with to individually put a Zergling on each of your Banelings, to spread their Banelings out perfectly, and that's when they start taking horribly cost-inefficient trades, and often at the end of the day, they'll take a bad trade and you'll get in the drone line. So that combined with them pulling queens, missing injects, that's where Zerg vs Zerg aggression starts to get really out of control. So what we're going to do is very simple scenario. I'm going to just come in with 3 Banelings. So the right watchtower is your kind of general area. Just use 10 Zerglings. So hotkey 10 Zerglings, just to make this nice and simple scenario. And I want you to use shift deselection. So where you kind of, basically what's going to happen is you're going to say everyone attack a Baneling, deselect a Zergling in your bottom display bar by using shift left click. Then you're going to right click on another one of my Banelings, shift deselect a Zergling, and so on. We can always practice this stuff just by doing 14-14 or 13-12, that sort of stuff, 13-13, one base sling Bane or Lings. And you might think it never works, but trust me, it still does, especially on your big 3 and 4 player maps. Heaps of people still die to it all the time. And it's nice to do it because it does rely on the slightest things. You're 10 seconds late with your timing, guess what? The spine's finished, the queens are on the ramp, GG. Likewise, you clumped your Banelings up a little bit too much because you weren't fast enough at hotkeying them. Okay, you were 15 seconds late because of that, because you were reorganizing your units. Because of that, things got messy and you kind of lost. So it's really good because it simplifies the game down to you being like, let's have sick micro, let's organize our units well, let's practice where we're focusing and all that sort of stuff. So whenever you feel like getting some aggressive play going, hop on, just play some Ling Bane Wars, and it's actually really, really good practice for these specifics. So yeah, okay, cool. So a whole bunch of Ling Bane info. So I think in terms of your homework, the best thing you can do is promise me you'll cheese some people on ladder and harvest some Zerg tiers. I expect a vial filled with them as proof in our next coaching session. Maybe a couple replays. So try to save a couple replays of that. Maybe we can glance at one at the start of our next session. Otherwise, Happy New Year. Good luck smashing it on ladder.